I think we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, whether you're watching this now or in the future. We thank you so much for joining us today. Today is the inaugural Big Ideas webinar from Trotec Laser. My name is Don. I am the consumables manager here, and I am lucky enough today to be your host for this very first Big Ideas webinar. I'm really, really excited. I'm joined by the ever impressive Mike Clark. How are you, Mike? You
Thanks,
guys
Don.
know Mike. If you've watched any of our content, you definitely know Mike. Mike's been in the laser business for some time. He is our expert on all things laser, particularly here in our Mississauga office. So we would encourage you, as you're tuning in, obviously to drop us a hello in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from. And also, if you have any questions for Mike or our other panelists, we would really appreciate if you would drop those into the chat. We always love getting to interact with you. And that is part of the reason we're here today. The other big reason, obviously, is because we really want to hear from our very esteemed panelists, our experts on their businesses, what it is that they've been going through in recent months, to tell us a little bit about their history, where they're at now, where they see themselves in the future, all those great things, and to hopefully have a great roundtable discussion with you. First and foremost, then, I don't want to delay any longer. I want to get started right away. Let's bring in, first and foremost, Tristan from TDH. How are you, sir?
I'm well. You guys?
Very well, thank you. You're in British Columbia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so we're based in the Lower Mainland. Our shop itself is in South Surrey, right beside the U.S. border, but we primarily service Vancouver. It's all within kind of a 35, 40-minute drive. And yeah, we're we've kind of got a 7,000 square foot facility here. We started as a neon shop about 30 years ago. We did a lot of the neon up and down Granville Street in Vancouver. Wow. And then it's kind of transformed into a full fabrication shop with a really kind of talented team of, welders and, people who do paint or woodwork or all those different things. And we focus on signs, displays, industrial arts type projects. And we kind of take on the projects that, or we like to take on the projects that others can't do. And very excited today to show one of our I'd say one of our more challenging projects. There's a lot of challenge or technical challenges to it. So kind of excited to share that with everyone here.
I'm excited to see it. I know, certainly all of the panelists that we have on this morning are experts in their field, but I know certainly I wanted to have an opportunity, and I'm so glad we have the website up here on the screen, because I was browsing through the website this morning, and you guys have some fantastic work in your portfolio, particularly sort of neon driven in some cases. I wanted to ask about that, and here's just a fantastic piece. I mean, the intricacy of something like that must be, not knowing anything about the fabrication of neon, aside from the fact that I know it is incredibly difficult. What does the manufacturing of a piece like that look like, when you're working with TDH, and then, the installation of it as well, I imagine must be quite involved.
Yeah, well, I'd say there's a lot of planning that goes into these projects, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. If we were to go back to the Neon Tiger project, and if you ever go to Kelowna, definitely stop by Skinny Duke's and check it out. So there is a lot of planning that goes into it. We have to plan where all the neon units are going, the overall shape of it. There's also a lot of talent that goes into, wrapping a shape like that. So, the overall tiger shape, if you look at the aluminum cabinet behind it, might be, CNC cut, for example. Right. And then the actual build of it, it's very much, an art from, some people who have been learning this trade and this craft over many, many years, in terms of how to put that together, how to fit. I think there's 5 or 6 neon transformers in the back of that thing, in the way that it's serviceable. That's always an issue when you're working in the sign industry, is you have to make it very serviceable, that you can pull it apart and replace a transformer if you need to. There's bending all the neon. There's that's very much an art form. There's no machine that can do any of that work. And then mounting and putting it all together is, you kind of have a bit of a paper pattern, but there's a lot of skill and judgment that goes into that as well. Making all the pieces fit together, all the electrical go in and look nice. There's a lot of different pieces that have to come together.
Certainly, yeah. Well, and that was what I was going to sort of ask about. Without wishing to make a generalization, I want to say that especially this morning, it occurred to me as I was browsing through the websites of each of our panelists that, Signcraft in particular really does have this wonderful mix of just raw creative design with sort of functionality and real world, sort of in place, touch it, feel it sort of installation art in a way. So much of the work that we are fortunate here to do at Trotec ends up being, beautiful wall mounted pieces. But we sort of have to use a different part of our brain sometimes when we're thinking about materials that have to actually go outside and live in the outdoors for any amount of time, right? And you guys have this wonderful combination of both. It seems to me that, as you said, there's no machine that can do that work. There's somebody there who not only needs to make something that's going to help to promote, Skinny Dukes, but at the same time is going to be a functional, beautiful piece of art in a way, a piece of design.
Absolutely. Yeah, it takes a lot of talented people working together, properly planned out to make all the pieces fit.
Would you have looked after the installation on that, Tristan, or was that done by somebody else?
No, we did the installation as well. So, we have crews that do go on site. Yep. I think there's some challenges with that building. It's an old brick building, so we had to put some structure inside, mount, brackets on both sides, bolt it all together. And yeah, we go out with, cranes and bucket trucks and all that kind of stuff to make it work.
Then you had to get a permit for that too, I take it, right? So.
Yep, we handled all the permitting process as well. That's not the most exciting stuff, but
and that's the thing that people don't understand is remember we had buddy a couple of weeks ago, people just don't understand what goes into these. Just the sign is beautiful and design it alone is impressive, but the amount of work that's done in the background is enormous.
It can be hard to appreciate that maybe for the passerby, right? But that's what I was so struck by, sort of in getting to look through so much signage and the way not only that each designer or each shop has their own style that kind of comes through, but then also the way that they reflect even the difference between what you might see, like I said, sort of in Vancouver to what you might see in downtown Toronto to what you might see on the East Coast, for example. I mean, there's sort of like a reflection of the area as well, right? I don't know. It's amazing. I have a mention here too in the chat about that you were potentially, you had a nomination, a BOCSI nomination, I believe, for that particular sign.
Yes, it's in the running for the Canadian Sign Awards, which the award presentation is another webinar tonight. So this is webinar number 1 of 2 for me today. We're hoping.
Good luck.
Yes, luck. We're hoping to win on that.
Congratulations! Yeah, well, I shall do my best to live up to those high standards. Then certainly. With that in mind, though, I would also like to introduce our second panelist, Helena, who is joining us from Synax in Manitoba. How are you, Helena?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome. I'm so pleased that I got your name correct, because anytime I'm doing my best to say someone's name correct, that's inevitably the time when I goof. Right, Mo Clark? Now, yeah, it's interesting, as Tristan was sort of mentioning, there are so many talented people who end up working together to sort of bring together something that may, like it's a sign is sort of maybe perhaps thought of as, first and foremost, kind of, a business expenditure. It's something that the observer sees, and it has to communicate clearly and that sort of thing. But in browsing through your site this morning, Helena, it really struck me that sort of aspect of, this super talented team of people all working together. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about Synex and sort of your origins and how you approach a new project, that comes across your desk?
Well, we are located in Steinbach, Manitoba. So it's a small community just 45 minutes outside of Winnipeg. Synex started as kind of a side business from an electrical company. So we have deep roots in the electrical industry. Obviously, we're going to do a lot of illuminated signs. But in 1982, the demand became so great for that electrical company that it split and formed Synex. So we've been doing, I guess that almost makes us at 40 years in the business of making signs. So we've grown a lot. Obviously, when I started, it was me and maybe 2 or 3 other people. Now we have close to 20 people in production, fabrication, a lot of front end staff, and installation. So yeah, we've grown and to do amazing projects, come together as a team. It's been quite a ride. We're very excited to what we have done and what we can do in the future.
100%.
And as I guess one of our highlights is the CMHR project. I'm not sure if we're going to be talking about that right now, but we have lots of large projects that we've done. Obviously, the IKEA building, that was, and at the same time, actually, as the IKEA building, we were doing Investors Group Field. So that one we took, Investors Group Field, we took right from concept. We developed all of the signage and all the designs for it, as well as manufactured and installed everything. So yeah, it's exciting to see what we can all do. And as a sign company, we're just always looking for new ways to help our customers. We don't see problems, we see innovation, we see opportunities for us to just help provide what our clients need. So that's the exciting part.
Absolutely. No, I think it comes across in your work. It's interesting that you say about having background as an electrical, like Trotec Laser, believe it or not, began as an offshoot of a stamp making company. Trodat, our sister company, we began making lasers simply because they couldn't find they couldn't find a laser that delivered the level of quality that they were looking for. And, some 20 or 30 years later, here we are as a laser manufacturer across the entire globe. So certainly we can really appreciate, I have to ask, so you mentioned about certainly doing a lot of illuminated signs. Would you say that is sort of the specialty of Synax? Do you have, a type of project that you're really, really, I mean, certainly you bring the same level of passion to every project, but is there something that you consider sort of a specialty of the shop?
You know what, basically custom. We have a lot of architects come to us and they have an idea, and what we try to do is help them flesh out that idea. And with the materials that we use primarily, which are acrylics and metals and LEDs, that sort of thing. So we really try to work together, try to create this collaborative environment that we can, just see what we can do. We also have a lot of our suppliers on board as well, like just trying to source out stuff for us and to provide the solution and the sign that everybody wants.
That's fantastic. Last question I have to ask. I was so blown away by the project that we were just showing on stream here, the field. Do you have to approach a project of that scale differently than you would sort of like a singular installation, or is it the same process? Investors Group Field, here it is, thank you. Would you approach it sort of in the same way, or because you mentioned about having to design all of the signage across the entire sort of the entire building, so I'm curious whether you would approach that slightly differently given the scope and scale, or if it would be sort of just business as usual at Synax, no problem, an entire football field, easy.
Well, this is definitely something that we have to back up even further from our normal tenders or our normal projects, because we're determining pedestrian flow, how to guide people into certain areas, what kind of signage is important at those points to direct people. And so that kind of is usually done in the front end, like before we get a project, but because we had to develop all of that, it was a learning process for us, just on that scale alone, because I think on a regular day when our installers were on site, they put on like 20 miles just walking around that place. It was a workout.
Wow. I was gonna say, if only we knew some football players perhaps who might be in good shape that could help you guys.
That and wearing steel-toed boots, and you have your whole weight system going. It was a good workout.
Last but not least, I would very much like to introduce Dave, who is joining us from Westmount Signs in Kitchener Waterloo, if I'm not mistaken, right? Kitchener Waterloo area?
Yeah, correct.
Fantastic. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about sort of Westmount, what makes you guys special, sort of the history of the company? What might we know that you guys have done recently?
Yeah, for sure. So Westmount Signs, we've been around for about 15 years. Started out as more of a smaller print and digital printing shop, and then over the years moved into more signage, exterior signage, and interior signage, and then developing more of the laser side of the business, and we do have electrical as well. So we like to think of ourselves as more of a one-stop shop for, from your business cards to promotion materials, websites, all your interior signage that you might need to exterior. So I think that's one of our, I guess, why people love working with us, because they can get their large exterior sign, or if they just need their smaller business cards, we know their branding, we know what they're looking for already with our designers and our team. And the project that I want to talk about today, it's not as large, or it's not one of our larger jobs, but it encompasses all of the exterior signage of the building and the interior signage as well. So there's a number of different signs that we did just to kind of show the different signs, and there is kind of a lasering component to each of the signs. And that job, it's from Greystone Racket Club, which they just did their rebranding, and they had new owners. So I'm not sure if you have any photos of that.
We may very well. I know certainly we're going to have an opportunity to get to see sort of a featured product, or a featured project, pardon me, here from each of you. Perhaps that's
okay, gotcha. I didn't know if that was,
to sort of pop along. I did want to ask, so
Sure.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit, now this is something obviously that interests Mike and I a great deal, but you have two locations, I believe, right? You have one that was sort of more on the printing side, that I believe is the Kitchener location, and then one that is sort of more on the, correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of on the sign side that's in the Waterloo location.
Yeah.
What sort of differentiates, aside from, like, say, just sort of the what I just explained, what type of work would you be doing in each of those, and sort of what machines might live in each location? Yeah,
so our Kitchener location, that's where all of the print is done, I guess, just paper print. So you have your business cards, you have your promotional flyers, your booklets, your annual reports. Those types of projects would be done there. And then at our Waterloo location, you have more of the digital printing, vinyl, or the larger sign fabrication, and our laser machines. Those are there as well. So,
very cool. Yeah. I should say we are very fortunate, as much as Dave is one of our customers. So we may have, if you have any Trotec laser questions, we may throw some of them to him as well, in order that he can give his sort of boots on the ground experience with a Trotec laser. Yeah. I hope you won't mind too much.
No, not at all, which is great.
So wanting to, not to tease our audience too much, I really would love to bring up some of the presentations and some of the images that our panelists have been so kind as to prepare for us. Once again, I should remind you, if you're just tuning in, we have these three incredible experts on with us today for about an hour, a little bit over an hour. So if you have any questions, if you ever want to know about, manufacturing, sign manufacturing, installs, CNC machines, laser machines, all that sort of stuff, this is a great opportunity to get to ask them a question. If you're a small business owner, a big business owner, is there medium business? I never hear anyone talk. I own a medium business. Please, by all means, drop us a question in the chat. We'd be happy to throw it out there. So really quickly, returning back to Tristan, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the Great Northern Way campus that we have on screen here? It is something special, I think.
Yeah, so this was a really interesting project for us. I'd say it was a really challenging project. There's a lot of build challenges to it. It's located at the Emily Carr campus. For those who aren't familiar, it's the Arts University in Vancouver. So if you go around the campus, there's quite a bit of very architecturally interesting pieces, as you can see with the, tomato flower shaped building behind. There's a bunch of things that, I suppose in terms of what the architects were looking for here, I think kind of the major challenges that I'll kind of talk through here. It's the form that they were looking here is a twisting type shape that kind of, as it goes up, it twists. There's no right angles through it, apart from the very top and the very bottom, which is kind of a very challenging thing. Maybe if we just go back to the previous slide, and then we'll get into how we designed it. Other challenges that we kind of were having to overcome with this is coming up with some really nice illumination. So if you look at kind of the band of illuminated acrylic that's going down the side, how do you make that illuminate really nicely without any shadows, hot spots, that type of stuff, considering the structural challenges that we also had to face making this stand up and not fall down. And then there's a lot of work and thought that also went into the corten finishing. So you'll note this is corten steel that we're working with. Very interesting material as it changes over time with the weather, particularly here on the West Coast, where we've got a lot of rainstorms and stuff like that are, well, particularly today in Vancouver, where it's like crazy rainstorm. We're being pummeled right now. It's going to have an effect on this over time, and that steel is going to change, which is really, really cool. So
that is cool. I will say I hadn't even considered that, but that's certainly particularly in a climate. I mean, obviously Manitoba and Ontario have their own sort of climate challenges, but in a climate where there is so much rain and so much sort of humidity all the time, having to take that into account when you install something like this has got to be a major challenge in terms of just material selection.
Well, yeah, the material selection in this case, it's meant to rust. So corten steel by its nature is a weathering steel. So it naturally rusts and changes over time. So you'll notice it's kind of a bit of a lighter orange here. If you go look at it today on site, it's going to have turned to a darker shade of rust. When we first installed it, it was kind of a bit of a bright orange. It's meant to rust over time. And like one of the things that we were going through here is there's a bunch of other corten steel that was installed elsewhere on site before us. And that had been weathering out in the elements for a good year and a half before we put this in. So one of the things that we tried to do is try to accelerate our aging process to make it match those existing elements on site as best we could, or catch up to it. So it's a bit of kind of chemical treatment we did to make that happen.
I will say, too, I just wanted to mention, I was struggling to describe the building that you see in the background there, but I think tomato flower may be the best sort of simile for, please, I'd love to see more. I had to acknowledge what a great observation that was.
It's supposed to be a flower. We like to call it a tomato.
I like it.
It's certainly, yeah, very architecturally interesting for sure.
Did you cut all the steel, Tristan?
Sorry?
Did you cut all the steel?
Yes. So maybe if we start switching slides, I'll kind of tell you how this all went together. So, and I think when I kind of introduced myself there and we were talking about the Neon Tiger, for example, we kind of said that there's a lot of planning that goes into this. So this was actually a good 6 months of back and forth with the architects to come up with how this will be built. They had a very specific form in mind. They wanted very specific things as it comes to illumination. And I'd say probably hit a bit of a brick wall when we kind of told them, well, we have to make this structurally sound. It had to be engineered. So, I had to have the right structure in it that's not going to never fall down. And then all the challenges in terms of making this illuminate nicely. So how do you deal with that? There's a lot of back and forth. We did a lot of 3D modeling, figuring out the placement of the support structure that goes inside of this to make sure that it's solid and it's going to last, 50 years or whatever it needs to. And then the other one, and you can kind of see it if you look at the lower bottom photo or the middle bottom photo. We had a lot of discussion around how do we make this illuminate nicely where, we don't have any shadows behind it. How do you attach that acrylic So those are all kind of considerations, and we kind of had to put in these keepers and stuff like that to make it look nice, but still, be able to attach it. So if we, and then basically we took this 3D model and then it all got mapped into 2D. So all the different pieces, which basically, if we look at the 565 panel at the top, that got mapped into 2D and went for cutting. So maybe if we flip to the next slide, we can see how it starts to come together. So there's a couple of different cutting machines or techniques that were used. The Corten itself was water jet cut, gives us nice, clean inside corners that are sharp. The downside to water jet cutting for us always is that it leaves marks as the water jet is focusing. So there's little marks on the metal or steel, which if you're finishing a piece is not a problem. When we get to kind of the tenant panels later, that had a bit of a different consideration. We're using raw materials that need to be finished, so it requires a different technique. And yeah, you can see here as we're kind of starting to put it together, we're building a steel structure inside, doing a lot of work to make sure that seams are nicely finished, welded and grinded, so it's nice and smooth. And we'll kind of talk a little bit as we kind of get further into how we make those disappear. All good? Any questions so far?
Well, I wanted to, if I could just stop you really quickly. We have a question here from Stefan, who, thank you so much for watching, Stefan. We really appreciate it. Everyone else in the chat, thank you so much for joining us. He asked about specifically lasers and wattage, but because you brought up waterjet, I wanted to ask you if you could give us sort of a general idea of what sort of materials you might be working with on the waterjet. And then I'm sure we'll see more as we go, but I'd love to hear a little bit about, what types of machines, particularly large manufacturing equipment that you would have in the shop and be using sort of day in and day out.
Yeah, so in the shop using day in, day out, we actually run a CNC here. When it comes to other tools, lasers, water jet, plasma would be kind of the other three that we use on a somewhat regular basis. It really comes down to the job and, what we're taking on, and then finding the right tool for it. So we don't have those machines in-house. We're lucky to have a couple of companies within a few blocks that have those available. So we call them up and send them over. Water jet, for example, if we're cutting thick steel, thick aluminum, anything over, quarter inch, which would handle in-house, then we tend to get a water jet cut and we send it. It's literally across the street. I've got 5 water jet machines. It comes back to us in 3 or 4 days. So it's just the volume. As I said, we take on unusual projects, which means we're always finding different solutions to do things. So it's like, oh, I need water jet one day, I need laser another day. We don't always, it doesn't justify having, huge machines each for the volume that we do for each of those in-house. So it's kind of finding, like we've got a couple of guys that are just up the street that have Trotec laser machines. So we use them for a bunch of laser stuff.
No, I can appreciate that. Like prioritizing the project and the customer first and foremost above all. Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is starting to come together. So you can kind of see the Corten in its raw form. You can kind of see it's grinded down. Like if you look on the right-hand picture, you can see the seam just below the 565. Obviously, that's something that we don't want in the finished product. They wanted a nice seamless kind of design. So we'll talk about finishing that. But yeah, you can. This was very much a project that was kind of hand. Yes, all the panels were cut out by water jet, but actually putting it together was, done by a welder, very much done by hand with like squares and angle measurements, trying to make it all work. If we look at here, so actually, let's go back to that slide. Yeah, right there. So kind of the next thing that we had to figure out a little bit, there's a couple of things going on here. Firstly, putting the acrylic in. All the acrylic in this case was CNC cut. The since CNC is a mechanical thing, it allows us to put a lip on it, which then we can do. The 565 is a push through, so it's flush, so that you have acrylic running along the back, so you don't see any light leaks on it, which is important for us. And then we're also starting to mount all the acrylic pieces up the side. And then the corten itself, you can see that it's orange. So that's kind of the first stages of rusting corten steel. So we got it sandblasted before we mounted the acrylic. And then we've kind of got an aging solution that we've come up in-house to pre-rust steel. It's usually easy to make things look new, but to make things look old, you get to have a bit of fun with it. What would the weather have done over time? And, we're kind of playing with the solution to try to make it look like as if it's been out in the weather for a while. And yeah, that's kind of, and the other advantage of it hides all our grinding and seams and all that kind of stuff, gives you a nice seamless look. That's
100%. What would you say? So you mentioned about using the CNC machine for acrylic cutting. What would you say are sort of the major advantages of using a CNC for something like that? And then, any sort of disadvantages or any areas in which you might look towards another technology?
Yeah. So in this case specifically, as I said, since CNC is mechanical, you can cut a lip around the acrylic and then fit it through from the back. So you have a lip that prevents any light leaks around it. You can't do that with laser. CNC can handle some types of materials, some thicknesses. Like for us, we don't go over really 1/4-inch aluminum. We can't handle steel on it. So in those cases, it's either laser or water jet that can handle those scenarios. CNC in other cases, inside corners, if you want a really sharp inside corner, if we actually flip to the next slide, if we look at the tenant panels here, if you look at, say, Blackbird Interactive, those are really kind of tight and really needs to be really sharp inside corners on, say, if you look on the eye or the N. A CNC bit would not be able to get in there and do that. That's something that had to be laser for that reason. And the other thing with this here is that's raw to be stainless steel. The client really wanted the raw steel look, not something we could do with water jet, because water jet will leave a mark on it when it focuses the water jet beam. So laser in this case was the way to go.
Gotcha. I would ask, so specifically.
And then, you see like the site is floating, so it's backed up.
Oh, please go ahead, please. Yeah.
Sorry?
Oh, please go ahead, yeah.
I was just saying that like you can see the site, Synasite is floating, so it's all backed up by acrylic, which would have been cut by CNC, just because that's easy to do on a CNC.
I would ask, so you mentioned sort of acrylic cutting on a CNC. What might be the principal materials that you would use the water jet and the laser for? I guess the laser is sort of perhaps, as you suggested, for more sort of intricate cuts that the CNC wouldn't be ideal for. But then I assume the water jet. I say the word laser so much every day, you wouldn't believe. The water jet would be principally for cutting steel and, as you say, sort of metal materials. Yeah,
so we'd mostly use water jet for aluminum that's more than 1/4-inch thick, and any kind of steel, which we can't do on CNC. Laser, as you kind of said, is the finer detail stuff. So we'll get acrylic laser cut if we're doing, like small letters or something like that, or aluminum or steel if we need something where, again, there's that fine detail work to it.
Makes sense. I mean, it's a beautiful piece. I was going to say, I was hoping that we would see it lit up.
Yeah, there you go. So, and another challenge, so this is kind of the stage where we're fitting all the LEDs. So light dispersion is a challenge. It's hard to see in the previous pictures in terms of the internal structure that's going through this, but there's some spaces where the internal structure gets quite close to the acrylic, which then you get hot spots. So there's a bunch of work we had to do, swapping to really small LEDs, and stuff like that to make it illuminate nicely throughout. So yeah, and then from there, we get the video now. So we did this on a slip tube system. So the install was actually kind of anticlimactic. It was a 10-minute thing of, oh, disappeared.
Oh, that's all right. I imagine that's just our producer on the back end making sure that the video runs correctly. This is the lovely thing. This is how you know it's live. You were saying sort of, but it being quite a simple process, though, like a sort of a 10-minute anticlimax.
Yeah, so it just got lifted off the truck. There's tubes within the sign itself that match tubes that had already been installed to concrete on site. So it's just a case of the crane truck slipping one set of tubes over the other, just right into place, and connecting the electrical, and it was done.
That's fantastic. I was going to say, isn't that so funny too? After months of well, I assume weeks and months of working on something, to just sort of see it in place is almost surreal, I imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really fantastic.
Yeah, so that was, I think, kind of the project. Was there any questions?
Actually, I do. I have a few. I love those kinds of projects where you have to do all sorts of in-house kind of research and development. I was just wondering, do you work with Corten a lot, Tristan? The reason being is we do a little bit, but how do you find that the rust process, like, does it bleed onto the concrete? Does it kind of leave a discoloration? That sort of thing. We have some customers that are, wanting to know how this is going to affect long term.
Like it rusts by nature, right? So it leaves rust stains. I'm actually surprised with this one. So like when we were building it and planning it, we're having a lot of internal discussion of this is just going to leave a massive rust stain on the ground. And in the finished photos, there's actually another piece that's around, which wasn't installed by us. You can't really see it, I don't think, in any of the photos that we have here, but there's Corten steel embedded in the ground just at the base. You can only just barely see it in those photos. But so there's a lot of Corten on site there. Surprisingly, there's a little bit of rust on the pavers that are there, but it's not really that much. So I'm surprised at how clean it's left the site. Definitely, when we were pre-aging it here in the shop, it left a rust stain on the floor that I don't think is completely gone. So it does leave a little bit of a mess. But again, the client wants something that's living over time and changing over time, and that's really what they were going for, and something they were willing to accept.
No, sorry, please go ahead.
It looks amazing, and I totally get how that doesn't, it's a huge sign, but it's got so many different components to work out that there's a lot of time and resources that get put into it. So it's a very, very beautiful sign.
Yeah,
no doubt. Sure. I would ask Mike, this is something that we don't always necessarily have the opportunity to comment on, but I'm curious, when you're talking to a customer specifically about something like this, like having to choose the right material for a job is almost as important, I would wager, as choosing the right machine for the job, right? Have you had customers who've wanted to achieve certain, looks from a piece of signage or something like that, and then you've had to sort of steer them towards perhaps a reverse or, who knows what it is, in order that they can try and get that, but still have that reliable weathering over time?
Yeah, I certainly do. I think the big what Tristan had said earlier was, I think the optimum word there was he was dealing with the architects, right? And it's the architects who dictate typically, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but normally what I hear from people is that the architects are telling us we have to do this is the client wants, what we have to match up with, right? Is that normally what happens with you guys? Tristan, Helena, Dave? The architects will tell you it has to be this way, and that's normally what has to be done, right? So
yeah, think to some extent it's a bit of an advisory role a little bit. So you have back and forth, a good discussion about how do you build this, you know, how can we achieve these different looks? And, you know, as I said, this one was a 6-month debate because they wanted something that initially we kind of said wasn't doable. So there were some lengthy meetings trying to figure this out. You know, there was a solution that basically got negotiated out of it, kind of thing, to meet their vision and get something that looked really cool. But you know, we don't want it to look bad either, right? So they want it to look amazing. We want it to look amazing. So we have to sit down and figure out how to meet that vision as closely as we can and make it look great. So everyone was at least on the same page there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, it goes back to your question, Don, is that, you know, these three people here are experts in their field, and you know, people are relying on them to help them out and everything like that. And it's that experience, and it's amazing how much, you know, you see this not a silly sign, but you see a simple sign that goes on, you know, in front of a building or on a building or whatever, but it's amazing how much work is done in the back end and how much negotiating may go on, you know, and there's just so many, you know, forks in the road sometimes that you have to go down. And I'm sure these guys can tell you about 100 different forks that they've had to go down the road. You know, when they're dealing with the architects, it's for them, the architects, it's their vision, it's their baby, it's their, you know, it's what they envision, and they pass that on to the customer, their customer, who then wants Tristan or Helena or Dave to come up with something that, you know, shows that vision.
I'm sure we've all had that experience of somebody coming through the door with a ton of ideas as well. What are you looking for? I really want something that's going to be awesome. Like, right. But more concretely, perhaps. I did want to, sorry, go ahead, Helena.
That's when we ask what their budget is.
Yes, that's exactly right. I'm afraid so, yeah. What level of awesome are we talking? Would you be able, Helena, to talk us through the project we see on screen here, the Museum for Human Rights?
Sure. So I guess right from the beginning, it was it was a project that I assume a lot of people were very interested in. It's a federal museum outside of Ottawa. And when we were asked to bid on it, we didn't know this at the time, but we had been shortlisted from one of 3 from across Canada. So that was quite an honor when we got awarded this project. Along with that award came a very tight deadline and certain costs that had to be incorporated, and many samples, many iterations of different types of processes had to be provided within this timeline. So we had to get to work right away. And what we did, I think what the best thing we did right initially is go into this building and document every location that a sign was going to be placed according to their plans, and documenting it by a photo, by measurements, and and we cataloged it. So that was kind of the starting point for us. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to go to this museum. It's an amazing, architecturally, it's an amazing building, and not a single straight wall is in there. So we had to manufacture signs that had to be plumb on angled walls. So that was a challenge for us, just in the sense that every wall is a different angle, and so we had to custom make, and that's our specialty, we had to custom make a frame for almost every sign, and with the correct angles and everything. So we referenced that catalog of photos and measurements quite regularly. So that was one of that was basically a really good starting point for us, going through samples, various different, Part of the project outlined that we had to provide mock-ups of different sign types. So once we had worked out all the details of that, we were able to more or less get into production. Now, you're very correct in saying the front end of these projects take up a considerable amount of time. I would say that on average, what the customer doesn't see is about 50% of their project happens in just developing the shop drawing, going through, the different suppliers and making sure you have all the materials involved on site. Once you finally get into production, that's, I'm not going to say the easy part, but for us, then we can relax a little bit.
Almost a relief, I imagine. Yeah. Everyone seems to be challenging you guys to do signs that are never on straight angles. That seems difficult. Everyone's getting this. I wouldn't have the first clue how to approach that.
Well, it was interesting. Me and another coworker went on site, and we had a level and a measuring tape, and that is how we determined angles all over the place. It was quite interesting. But one of the things too that was kind of developed, and on this slide you see it, it's a freestanding monument with a touch screen inserted into it, but on the bottom of it is Braille and tactile. Now there's a fair amount of Braille and tactile on there, and we, up until this project, we had basically been doing, we had been providing interior signs, but we had not been doing them in-house. We had been subbing out the Braille and tactile part of it because we didn't have the machine. And with this project, we felt that this was something we needed to bring in-house, and so that we can control it, because on these types of signs, you see that there is, well, we have the French and English and Braille for each of those languages. So we have a lot of information being applied to these signs, and we just needed to be able to control that part of it. And we didn't, they're large, so that was also a thing too. For some of these signs, we actually had to use our CNC machine to do the Braille and tactile, which it's not really designed to do, but we found a way. And we had to put in the Braille by hand on some of those signs. So yeah, a little labor intensive, but again, the things that you do to make sure that the sign is exactly what your customer wants. And just different types of finishes and different types of machines that we did use. We had, and like Tristan said, I mean, we have a CNC on site, but anytime anything needs to be laser etched or laser cut or water jet cut, we do we do have associates that we go to, and we utilize their services. As sometimes it's, in the case of the Braille and tactile machine, we felt that was a good investment at that time, but we don't do a lot of laser etching. So this part of it is the donor walls. Oh, and it's a good thing that we're on this slide, because as you can see, it has a Tyndall-stone wall. It's a rough cut Tyndall-stone wall. Now, on this wall, we have individual letters. They're actually fabricated letters, stainless steel. However, on a lot of the interior walls, we have much smaller letters that had to be installed onto these rough cut Tyndall-stone walls, and the mounting points were so close together that we were finding it was starting to break apart the wall, and that's not our intention. We didn't want to create more work for our clients and by having to fix walls and stuff. But the Tyndall-stone is a very it's a very lightweight type of a stone, so it does break and chip, crack quite easily. So we had to develop a way where we could install these tiny little letters They were like 2.5 inches tall, and we had to find a way to install them without breaking the wall. So what we ended up doing, and this is where we have to try and manage our customers' expectations, is we applied the letters onto a clear acrylic, and instead of having like hundreds of mounting points, we would have 4 with the standoffs that we would mount the clear acrylic panel to. I probably don't have a photo of that in there right now, but because these were a little larger, and with a, you know, if we had to modify it into just 2 mounting points, then, you know, these are large enough letters that could be done with. So, so yeah, we had a lot of interesting challenges, a lot of interesting techniques that were developed through all that. I would say too that for me personally, the takeaway on this project was that I really needed to make sure that I was delegating and not taking on the whole project on my own, but making sure that my team was all involved. And I would say that they were all very invested in getting this project out the door and in the place on time. So it's a great time for all of us. So, and a great project to work on.
I should say I mean, to get to work on such a momentous museum as well, like such an important building, I imagine, I mean, it comes with certainly a lot of excitement, and it's certainly something to be proud of, but at the same time also, I can't imagine it wasn't without its pressure a little bit as well, right? So I think, I mean, it's very clear that your team delivered beautifully, but I would love to quickly touch on, you know, sort of similar to the question I asked you in the beginning of the webinar. I know you must approach something of a certain scale, you know, in a slightly different way. Do you approach something, you know, with such, as you sort of mentioned, like finding out that you were shortlisted and finding out that you were selected alone was an honor. Like, do you approach a project like this with any sort of, you know, special pre-preparation, or is it just like, let's just tackle it and let's you know, one day at a time sort of thing?
Well, we do, when we quote on something like this, we kind of formulate a plan on how this is all going to work should we get the award. And that does help us with that. I mean, it's very basic. It's like, who's going to be responsible for this, who's responsible for that, because we don't really know until we get into it how much this is all going to take, because we were awarded the interior and exterior, but then the donor package came on afterwards. So that almost doubled our work, because there's so many donor opportunities within that museum that, and every one of them has individual black cut letters. And yeah, there was a lot of installation, and just even over, like, you're on a wall, but you're hanging over a couple of floors, because there's that the ramp system, the alabaster ramps, and it's on one wall, but you don't have any support or any way of getting like, we had to be a little creative in trying to find our scaffolding and how to get up onto those walls in some areas. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a fun challenge to have to look into. So
super fun, as long as it's not me out on that scaffolding. That is so scary. Last but certainly not least, I would love if Dave, if you would talk us through, I believe this was the project you mentioned, the Greystone Racket Club. Yeah.
Thanks, Don.
Please.
So this is a project that we just did recently, and it's kind of interesting to try to get a little bit larger materials. Well, I guess just during COVID, a lot of stuff is harder to get. So just one of the challenges was just sourcing larger, some of the larger pieces for materials to fabricate. As I said, Greystone Racket Club, it was so it was a racket club to begin with, and then new owners, new branding. and really just, I guess, as you can see on the screen right now, they wanted, or the G and the shield is a big part of their branding. And they, so what we tried to do with that is give it more of a 3D effect with all of the signs that we built with. So you can see the G, all the black pieces, that's 1/4-inch black acrylic. And then on top for this specific sign, there's just, it's on top of aluminum composite panel for that. So we did all the exterior signs and all the interior signs as well. So you can just see there's a little bit more of a closer, up close photo of that. And you can see, so with the two signs there, so we did both of those. Both of the shields are both on aluminum composite with black acrylic, and then the Greystone and Racket Club, that's actually on 1/4-inch aluminum itself, just because we thought it would weather a little bit better in the elements. And for the ground sign, so we're using an existing ground sign, so the gray base was there, and then there is another topper from the previous client. So what we did is we took off the existing top piece of the sign, and then we installed a push through for the Greystone Racket Club, and then for the shield itself, we created some push through cans on top to give it a little bit more kind of status, and you can see it, yeah, a little bit better. So that's a bit more of a close-up of the exterior signs.
Question for you on those ones. If we're just back one slide, like those look massive. Is it multiple sheets of acrylic and? No, that's a good call. So for the G, I guess for the G that's on the screen, the G is one piece of acrylic, and then the shield pieces on the exterior, they're seamed in the center of the, right there, and the top and bottom of the center. So they're actually multiple pieces of acrylic, and And are you worried, like, so you've got acrylic on aluminum composite panel, which are two different materials that will heat up and cool down at different and expand and contract at different rates. Are you worried about that at all? And how did you make sure it's going to stay together nicely? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because as you definitely know, the exterior signs, acrylic definitely expands and contracts. And so it's really for these signs, we just use double-sided tape and some of the same tape that we use for most of our installs, which is just I believe this tape is 3M. I'm not sure what exact model it is, but we do have some other similar signs that are 1/4-inch acrylic that we have done in previous years, and we found that they've held up for the most part in the elements. Obviously, the larger you get, the higher chance, the larger of the sign that you get, the higher chance of expanding and contracting and weathering. But for the most part, for the signs that we made, they weathered pretty good.
Can I ask really quickly, both Tristan and Helena, how, sort of in past you've approached sort of a similar problem? So, talking about that the difference in materials, or specifically how you would approach something being outdoors to ensure that it is going to have that same impact and that same look, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that sort of thing. Tristan, perhaps to you first.
Yeah, I'd say most of our stuff is built out of aluminum. And, that's very durable. It will, when we do our whole painting coating at the end, it's going to last and look great for a long time. The reason I brought up the question is, we have concerns if someone comes to us and they're looking for like an 8-foot continuous piece, and like we've had requests for outlining things in a push through acrylic before. which we've tried, and it hasn't been super successful just because the expansion coefficient of acrylic and aluminum is different. And as they heat up in the sun or freeze in the winter time, they both change sizes, and it's going to start to, if it's not done well or done, either if it's not done well, or just in some cases, if it's just too big, it's going to expand and contract too much and come apart. So we try to steer people away from going too big on the acrylic pieces outside, just because we have concerns about the longevity of it.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen even with the engraving plastic, where somebody wants to put a standoff sign or screw a sign to the side of a building, and the holes are too tight for the screws, and the screws are expanding different than the acrylic, and then the acrylic starts to crack and everything. So again, it's silly little things like that you have to take into account especially when you're working outside. As these guys know, it's just the weather will just change your materials so quickly, and if you've got different ones together, it's certainly something you've got to think about when you're putting it doing the finished products. So.
Yeah, and then the other one that we often run into is people are looking for wood, which wood degrades over time, right? So we do it. There's a lot of work that goes into kind of finishing it and sealing it and making it look great. But there's also some kind of cool, it's aluminum, but made to look like wood, and it's got like a nice wood grain texture to it. So we try to, it has its limitations as well, because if you cut it, you see the aluminum inside, but we try to steer people to that where it's appropriate, and that will look good for decades, no problem. So there's always challenges when you have interfacing two disparate materials.
Absolutely. I would say in particular too, Dave, I noticed on some of the photos that were sort of later in the presentation, the shield installation you guys did, particularly when you see it up close, the materials that you've chosen, it gives such a brilliant luster to the logo on the wall. I think it's super, super effective. I think it's really, really beautiful. Particularly, so perhaps one earlier there, Lev, if you don't mind. This one in particular, I noticed, the combination between the shine on the acrylic there, and then also the shine on the aluminum that it's sitting on top of, I think is incredibly, incredibly effective. It really gives that impression of being a shield, whilst also you're sort of drawn to the logo itself and then across, right? It's really, really effective in my mind.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Yeah,
do you have backlighting on the Greystone there, Dave?
On some of our shields, so like this one, that is a halo lit sign. So the golf facility, that's pin mounted, and the halo lit sign, that's obviously off the wall a little bit, so then you get that nice glow. And then we did an exterior sign as well that's halo lit too. So that's one of the types of signs that we're starting to do a lot more for interior and exterior, are halo lit signs.
So halo lit is just with the lighting around the edge. Is that just for people that don't know what it is? So.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, exactly.
It's the glow you see when marketing staff pass you by, Mike, around each of us.
I don't see them very often, Don. They don't normally come up to it.
Yeah, I walked right into that one. So certainly, as we said in the beginning, and if you're just tuning in, this will be available on our YouTube channels. But really quickly, I wanted to thank all of our panelists. We have some submitted sort of moderator questions here that I would love just 2 or 3 to take it in turns to go, to speak with each of you. And then obviously, please, anyone feel free to cut me off with any questions of your own. If you have some questions in chat that you'd like to drop in that we can throw in, that would be fantastic. So I want to ask each of you, over time, have you noticed any major shifts in the type of requests that clients are making? I'd love to go to Helena first on this one, if you don't mind.
Sure. I think as far as the shifts that I've seen, I don't know if they're major or not, but maybe more providing an all-inclusive. As kind of being a one-stop shop, right? You provide the parking lot signs, the exterior signs, the interior signs, banners, whatever. It's become more of a package that we've been able to offer and has been requested from us. So that's what I've seen as a major shift. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Dave, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'd say for major shifts, I mean, obviously, I think it's kind of similar to what Helena said initially with, clients coming in with some large and big ideas, and then it really just comes down to budget and or feasibility with it. But really for most of the signs that we are doing, and a lot of municipalities around here who are starting to mandate or getting out of the old sign boxes, which is or nowadays the LED lit sign box with acrylic and then vinyl on the top, and a lot of them are going more to channel letters or push through signs, kind of like Tristan, you said. Obviously, the larger you get, the less feasible those signs are. But just a lot more of the municipalities seem to be, and just even landlords are looking for nicer looking signs to make their buildings and companies look a little bit nicer and sharper.
Certainly. Tristan, how about yourself?
I think a couple of things. Firstly, kind of in the illumination space, I think neon's back, to some extent at least. Neon used to be the illumination of choice that kind of died out as LED came in. We're seeing it come back for a lot of kind of retro, vintage, trendy type stuff. Bars, restaurants that want to stand out in some way. The artwork statement piece. And then I'd say maybe kind of the second thing we're seeing a lot more kind of raw materials, either kind of raw materials or aged materials. So like if we looked back at kind of the Great Northern Way project I presented there, you had cork and steel, which was an aged material, and then the tenant panels were raw 2B stainless, which a little bit challenging in itself because it doesn't come out of the mill normally without scratches. We actually had to sort through a bunch of stainless steel trying to find pieces that we could cut out without scratches. And I think the challenge there is making things look new. We're set up to do that. We've got a nice, beautiful paint booth, and we can make things look beautiful that way. Making things look old or beaten up or weathered or that's a whole other challenge itself. That is actually, I think, in a lot of ways a bit more difficult.
Absolutely. One of the things that certainly stood out to me in getting to speak with all four of you certainly, but is the level of innovation that you've had to sort of bring to recent projects. I think to sort of speak to what Dave was saying, that very often you're not able to maybe fall back into old habits or old patterns, that you're really having to push. I think about Helena, like you said, sort of making the CNC do braille, right? I mean, like finding new ways to deliver what it is that the client is looking for that are maybe, outside of the box. Can you do this? Like, well, I don't know yet, but let's find out, right? Let's see if we can make it happen. Sort of to that point, I guess, modern projects often incorporate lighting, digital pieces, that sort of thing. How do you take these components into account when designing a project? I will go back to Tristan, if you don't mind.
So that's a huge part of what we do. And, it's a lot around kind of the selection of what you're doing. I think we're just talking, a lot of clients are going, push through channel letters, halo channel letters. We do a lot of those. Those are quite popular. But if you get into more art type pieces, there's a lot of thought that goes into, how are you putting the lighting into something? How does it interact with the materials that you're working with? Even sometimes interactions with, the colors that you're dealing with. Specifically for halo lighting, we sometimes run into the challenge of someone wants to put halo lighting on a black wall, which is a little bit difficult, or like that. That's one that we still struggle with sometimes in trying to make that look good because of the shadows that are projected, and the black doesn't really reflect light so much. So that's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. Maybe it's we change the sheen of the sheen of the paint that's behind it or something like that to make it stand out a little bit more, project a little bit nicer. So there's kind of a lot of different thought pieces that go into, the selection of the lighting that you're going to use and how it interacts with the materials around it to kind of give an optimal result.
Fantastic. Helena, same question to you.
Yeah, so basically everything that Tristan said. Can I do that?
Of course, absolutely.
I guess in just further adding to that, we do solar panels. We try to provide that option as well to our clients, and so there's a multitude of things that we need to determine if that is something a customer is wanting to do. What we try to do is try and get that information right off the bat, just so that we can design everything together. Installing solar panels can be, they can look out of place very quickly. And so either you need to have a place where you can put them or incorporate them into the design, as well as having a place for your batteries. Knowing how long they want these signs to be illuminated, because they will be on timers, and it will be sensitive to how much solar power you have stored up. So there's a few things that we try to work through when we provide that type of lighting, and even the digital component. We do digital signs, so location, that's always a place, a thing that we need to determine is where is it located, what's the traffic, who are you targeting, and who is it that you're trying to target with these signs. Sometimes the resolution doesn't need to be as small as they may want. They may want to spend the money on the size of the sign instead of the resolution. So all these things, you try and take into consideration with the lighting and the digital components.
That makes sense. Dave, finally to you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I definitely echo Tristan, Helena, what you guys shared, and I guess to try to add something additional on top of that, really just working with the client's vision and the designer, trying to be as creative as they can, and the realities of fabrication. So just really working with all three parties to try to come up with an end result that the client is happy with and loves. And with that, especially with digital signage, there's a lot more cities and municipalities are coming in with different guidelines as to where you can be putting these signs. And kind of, Mike, you spoke a little bit about that. Initially, there can be a lot of back end work that goes into these signs to even just see if this idea is feasible with a certain lighting or the digital signage that the client wants initially.
Well, that makes sense. I have a final question here I wanted to throw up for you. We've sort of touched up on this, but I want to sort of build on it a little bit to say, so the question as submitted was, when it comes to precision, so what types of technologies does your team use to achieve accurate results? Do you use different equipment for different materials? We have had the opportunity to speak to this a little bit. What I would like to ask is sort of, not only, again, what sort of techniques and what sort of machines you're using day in and day out, but then also I'm curious about where you see sort of the future of your business moving. You mentioned, each of you, I believe, sort of how things have changed over the course of the time that you've been in business, and where do you hope to find what it is that you do sort of 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. I would go to Dave first, not to put the you guys are also agreeable. It's wonderful, but it's it's difficult to sort of, I'd like to echo my colleagues and add great answer.
Yeah. So for precision, well, like Tristan and Helena, so we do have a CNC machine as well, and we also do have three laser machines in our shop, which we our lasers that we use are CO2 lasers, so not water lasers that Tristan was speaking to earlier, and we use those daily and almost on every project where we're lasering a certain component of our signs, and definitely using the CNC machine as well. And it's just great to be able to use the CNC machine and even the laser, if you are able to use it, just so much more precise than anything. You get all nice, crisp, clean cut lines if you are using acrylic. And I think that's where things are now, and I think they're just going to keep going in that direction, and potentially just different aspects of lighting and digital signage where it is now, to be able to incorporate those a little bit more into where signs are.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I would perhaps go over to Helena next.
So what we do, we use a CNC. We have a braille and tactile machine. We try to steer our customers to, like Tristan said, into non-wood related materials, just because wood is not something that it degrades over time. So the CNC is used all the time. I would be interested in knowing what a laser, does it substitute what a CNC would be able to provide for us? That would be, something to explore as well. And maybe if, maybe that's another conversation. But as far as the equipment that we use for precision and technology, like those right now are what we primarily use.
Fantastic. I would pose that question perhaps even quickly to Mike, because I'm sure it's something that a lot of customers question about. How does the laser work as a complement to the CNC more than anything, I think, is sort of often how we look at it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's certain limitations on one machine, like a CNC, has limitations on certain, as Tristan said, where he was trying to get into those small areas. CNC may not be able, or that 90-degree corner may not be able to do that where the laser can do it. But then, there's other things where the CNC is a lot better than the laser machine in terms of, the more varied materials that you can use. So again, that's the beauty of having all that equipment in house, that, you can sort of bounce around between the different forms of fabrication equipment. As Tristan said, it's nice when you've got somebody across the road too. So if you have the limitation, it makes it easy to run across the road and get it done.
When you have that fortunate neighbor with 4 water jets.
When we first got our CNC, or when we were contemplating getting the CNC for the first time, we were really debating, because we had somebody that we were using that had a CNC machine and and it wasn't that costly, and it was just a time frame, it was the turnaround, right? Ideally, you want to have everything in house, but sometimes it just doesn't make dollars and cents to have it. But once we got the CNC and we realized how much we actually used it, it just became such an invaluable tool. So that's why, you're never quite sure until you make that plunge. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you go one step further to that, I mean, you can't be an expert in the field if you don't have the equipment to a certain degree too, right? I mean, that's the big thing. I mean, I can go back to just, people ask about a rotary attachment, and I always tell them, I say on the laser machine, and I always say, well, you can buy the rotary attachment later on, but what are you going to do? Well, if you don't buy the rotary attachment when you get the machine, then you're going to wait for that big order to come in, and then the big order is going to come in, and then you're going to order the rotary, and then you're going to go, geez, how do I use this thing? Yeah. And then, the next thing you're trying to get it. So, it's always nice when you have that equipment, because you understand how the machine relates to the equipment that you're working with and everything like that. So it makes you just that much better of a knower of how materials will work and how they go together and everything like that. So
again, as you said, that one-stop shop. Finally, I would ask Tristan the same question.
In terms of machines, I want all of them.
Yeah,
terms of machines I can afford, that's another conversation. Yeah, I think it's better to have the stuff in-house if you can. And it really comes down to two things. It would be the turnaround time and your ability to innovate with it would be a big one. You know, we push our CNC machine in a lot of different ways to try different things and stuff like that. Something you can't really do if you're sending it across which I guess you can kind of do it if you're sending it across the street or whatever, but you have less options to try to pull something new off of if, you know, someone else has a certain way of running their shop and their machine and all that type of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, my
that makes sense.
Small additions to that question.
Absolutely. We've already gone 20 minutes over. I don't want to keep the three of you too much longer. Certainly, if you have the opportunity, I mean, anyone who's watching this either now or in the future, I would definitely not hesitate to reach out to any of the three of them, particularly if you are local either to BC or to Manitoba. If you're here in Ontario, obviously, I mean, these really are some of the best in the field. Do not hesitate to reach out either to them or to Trotec Laser. We're all right. We like to think we do a pretty good job. I would like to thank the three of you again so much for taking part today. Dave, Helena, Tristan, all three of you, thank you so much. Mike as well, obviously, thank you. Again, don't hesitate to get in touch with either us or one of the three of them if you have any questions sort of following on from the webinar. We will definitely, thank you so much. So we'll post all the panelist information in the description of the video so you can always reach out. We thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you again next week on Friday with another great video. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks.
See you guys. Take care.